Dad, what's the point of holding $60 million? Let's die soon. I was stunned behind the door of the VIP room of the five-star restaurant. It was my daughter's voice, the child I had just sold my entire business to secure her future. Greg, my son-in-law, sneered. Don't worry, this glass of wine will send the old man off gently. It turned out that this celebration party was my funeral. I swallowed my tears and walked in as if nothing had happened. Taking advantage of their carelessness, I quickly swapped two identical glasses of red wine on the table. Come on, let's drink to your filial piety. I watched my son-in-law drink up the poison he had given me and smiled coldly, waiting for the moment he collapsed. I guess 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe, even if it only takes a second. What time is it now, and where are you listening? I had just sold my brainchild, Apex Biodine, for $60 million. $60 million, an unimaginable sum for 5-year-old Arthur, who had started it all in a rented garage in Palo Alto with just 2 employees and a big dream. But now, at age 68, sitting alone in my lawyer's office with the ink barely dry on the contract, I felt a strange emptiness. Without my wife Laura to share this moment, all my success paled in comparison. She had passed away 3 years earlier, leaving me alone in the spacious 3-bedroom ranch house we had bought in the early days of hardship. To ward off the loneliness, I decided to throw a small celebration. Just me, my only daughter, Emily, and her husband Ryan Ford. I chose l'Orangerie, the most expensive and luxurious restaurant in town, where reservations were required months in advance. I wanted to make it up to them, to believe that even though Laura was gone, we were still a family. L'Orangerie that night was as splendid as a palace, with its dazzling crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths. We were seated at the best table, overlooking the sparkling city lights below. Dad, you're a legend! Ryan raised his $20 glass of water, his voice filled with admiration. To you, the man who built everything from nothing. Emily chimed in, her smile so bright it was blinding. We're so proud of you, Dad. I looked at them, feeling a surge of emotion. Maybe I was wrong to doubt them. Perhaps their sudden interest in the past 6 months, since the news of the Apex Biodine deal broke, was genuine. But then Ryan, with his usual slippery charm, leaned toward me. He had just ordered an expensive bottle of Chateau Margaux without asking me, and now he was fondling the brand-new Rolex watch on his wrist, a gift I had given him last week. So, Dad, he began, his tone sounding concerned, but his eyes gleaming with barely concealed greed. Now that the company has been sold, what are you going to do with the money? You know, you're getting old, and managing such a large sum of money can be tiring. Just leave it to us, and just enjoy your old age. His words were like a bucket of cold water thrown straight at me. Enjoy your old age? Did he mean I was so senile that I couldn't manage my own money? I looked at Emily, hoping she would defend her father, but she just smiled and nodded in agreement. Their eyes weren't the proud eyes of children looking at their father. They were the eyes of people looking at a winning lottery ticket. They looked at me like a fat prey ready to be slaughtered. A feeling of unease crept up inside me, cold and sharp. I remembered Laura's warnings from years ago. Ryan is only looking at your wallet, Peter. He doesn't love Emily. He loves the safety net she provides. I had always brushed it off as being overly suspicious. But now, sitting in this fancy restaurant, I began to wonder if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. At that moment, my phone vibrated. It was a confirmation message from a Swiss bank. $60 million had been transferred into my account. Excuse me for a moment, I said, standing up and placing my napkin on the table, not forgetting to glance at my still full glass of Chateau Margaux. I walked toward the bathroom, my heart heavy with thoughts. Little did I know that when I returned, my life would change forever. I washed my hands thoroughly in the marble sink, looked at myself in the mirror. A 6-8-year-old man, gray hair, eyes sunken with fatigue. I wondered, was I being too suspicious? Were Laura's words haunting me too much? I took a deep breath, adjusted my tie, and walked out. As I stepped out of the bathroom door, a figure suddenly appeared, blocking my path. It was a young waiter, probably in his 20s, his eyes wide with fear. His name tag read Miguel. "Sir," he whispered, his voice trembling, glancing around as if afraid someone would notice. I apologize for disturbing you, but I have to tell you this. I frowned, my self-preservation instincts kicking in. What's wrong, son? Miguel swallowed, his face pale. Your glass of wine. Don't drink it. I saw him. Your son-in-law. As soon as you left, he slipped a white powder into your glass. So fast, in a split second. My heart stopped. The world around me seemed to collapse. My son-in-law? Greg? Was he trying to poison me? Right here? At this celebratory dinner? It couldn't be. I wanted to brush it off. To call the waiter a liar. But then the image of Greg's greedy eyes flashed through my mind. And Emily's sympathetic smile. Are you sure? I asked, my voice cold. 100% sure, sir, Miguel insisted, his eyes unusually firm. I was standing nearby, wiping my glass. I swear on my honor. I pulled $100 bill from my wallet and stuffed it into his hand. Thank you. Now get back to work, and don't tell anyone about this. I walked back to the table, my steps heavy. From a distance, I could see Greg laughing and talking, his hands waving, sweat beading on his forehead despite the restaurant's full-power air conditioning. He was nervous. He was acting. I sat down, trying to keep my face as calm as possible. Sorry to keep you waiting, I said, glancing at my glass of Chateau Margaux. It was still a deep red, seductive, and deadly. It's okay, Dad, Emily said, her smile still beaming. We were waiting for you to raise a glass to toast. I looked at my daughter, my heart aching. Did she know? Was she an accomplice? I didn't dare think about it. Okay, I said, picking up the silver fork beside the plate. Come on, let's raise a glass. And then I accidentally dropped the fork on the floor. It hit the table leg, making a small clang. Oh, how clumsy of me. I bent down to pick it up. That was my chance. In the split second when both Emily and Greg were looking at the fork, I quickly swapped the two wine glasses. Mine went to Greg's to mine. It all happened in less than a second, on the table covered with pure white Egyptian linen. When I looked up, the fork was in my hand. No one suspected a thing. I raised the new glass of wine, the safe glass, high, looking straight into my son-in-law's eyes. My gaze was no longer that of a gentle old father, but that of a businessman who had faced hundreds of ruthless competitors in the marketplace. For our family, I said, my voice fierce. For our family. Greg and Emily answered in unison, raising their glasses. Greg, without hesitation, took a big gulp from the glass of wine. The glass of wine he thought was his, but which actually contained the deadly powder he had put in it. And I waited. Less than 2 minutes after the first sip, Greg began to act strange. The smile on his lips faded, replaced by a puzzled frown. He reached up to loosen his silk tie, his face starting to flush like a drunkard. What's wrong, Greg? I asked, my voice full of false concern, but inside my heart was pounding. Greg didn't answer. He tried to breathe deeply, but it seemed like the air couldn't get into his lungs. His red face gradually turned purple. His eyes rolled back, white, his hands clawing at his throat as if trying to pull out some invisible object. Bang! Greg fell to the cold marble floor, taking the tablecloth with him. Crystal glasses and bone china plates shattered, creating a deafening sound that tore through the luxurious space of the restaurant. The whole restaurant was in chaos. Screams rang out. The well-dressed guests jumped from their chairs and backed away in horror. I stood there feigning shock, but the old man's eyes never left Sarah. This was when the real person emerged. Instead of rushing to her husband's side, Sarah stood still, looking around as if assessing the situation. There were no tears, no screams, only cold calculation in her eyes that mirrored mine. Don't make a big deal out of it, Sarah said to the manager who was running over, her voice trying to sound calm but clearly strained. My husband, he's just drunk. He's not used to strong alcohol. Drunk? A man who had barely finished a glass of red wine was convulsing and foaming at the mouth like this? I shuddered. It didn't just want me to sleep. It wanted me to die right there. The drug was too strong. The distinctive Chicago ambulance siren blared, tearing apart the quiet night outside. The red and blue lights flashed through the restaurant window, illuminating Greg's pale face as he lay convulsing on the floor. When the paramedics rushed in with a stretcher, I knew my moment had come. I rushed forward, grabbed one of the paramedics by the sleeve, and said loudly enough for Sarah to hear, Do you think he's been poisoned? Or Did someone put something in his drink? I glanced at Sarah. For a split second, her calm mask cracked. Her eyes widened, staring at me, not with worry for her husband, but with the utter panic of someone who had just been caught. As the stretcher carrying Greg was wheeled out to the ambulance, Sarah turned back to look at me one last time before running after him. Under the flashing lights of the ambulance, I could see the disappointment in her eyes. Not because her husband was dying, but because I, the real target, am still standing here, completely healthy. 2 in the morning. The hallway at Northwestern smelled of antiseptic and cheap coffee. The cold white fluorescent lights cast a chilly shadow over the hard plastic chairs where I sat, huddled like an old man on the brink of death. I honestly felt like I'd aged 10 years overnight. Greg had fallen into a coma and was being taken to the ICU. The Chicago police were there, 2 officers with notebooks in hand, and that was when my daughter Sarah began her second performance of the night. I sat in the corner pretending to tremble, my eyes closed in exhaustion, but my ears strained to hear every word she said to the doctor on duty. "Doctor, I have a confession to make." Sarah's voice trembled, full of false guilt. "My husband, he's been under a lot of pressure lately. He's been using drugs sometimes. Cocaine, maybe high doses of Adderall. I've been trying to talk him out of it, but he won't listen. Is it possible? He's overdosed?" I wanted to jump up and scream at him for being a liar. Greg might be a greedy fool, but he's a coward, more afraid of drugs than death. What was Sarah doing? Was she ruining her husband's reputation just to throw the investigation off track? If she'd do that to her husband, what was I to her? Just a $60 million obstacle to get rid of. After the police left with the drug overdose theory, Sarah came toward me. I curled up, trying to make my hands shake. "Dad," she sat down next to me, taking my hand, which was cold. "Are you okay? You worried me." I looked up at him, my eyes glazed over. "Dad." "I'm so scared, Sarah. How did this happen?" "I don't know," he sighed. And then suddenly his gaze became searching. "Dad, when you came out of the bathroom, did you see Greg eating or drinking anything strange? Or did anyone come near our table?" He was checking me out. He wanted to know if I saw anything. "I don't know." I shook my head, my voice weak. I just saw him fall. Everything was spinning. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief, patting my hand. "It's okay, Dad. Everything will be fine. You're old. Don't think too much." He had no idea that, in the pocket of this senile old man's vest, my hand was clutching something. It was Greg's silk handkerchief. When it fell down and foamed at the mouth, I pretended to bend down to catch it and quickly stuffed the handkerchief covered in its saliva into my pocket. It took me back to the villa, kissed me goodnight with a kiss on my cold forehead, but tonight I knew I couldn't sleep. The battle had only just begun. That night, the house was silent, except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the living room. I couldn't sleep. The image of Greg twitching on the floor kept playing in my mind. If that glass of wine was for me, I tiptoed out of bed, barefoot on the cold wooden floor. I walked toward the west wing, where Sarah and Greg had been staying since they sold their apartment downtown to take care of Dad. A reason that sounded filial, but now it reeked of calculation. I walked into Greg's office. It was cluttered with pizza boxes and empty beer cans. In the corner was his new SentrySafe safe. I looked at it, wondering if I could open it. I tried Sarah's birthday. No. Their wedding anniversary. Still no. Then I remembered the grandchild who had died at birth, a pain the family rarely talked about. I entered his birth date. Click. The safe door swung open. Inside was a jumble of papers. I flipped through them, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from shock. American Express black card statements with 6-figure balances. Margin calls from cryptocurrency exchanges, showing Greg had blown through his Bitcoin just as the market crashed. But the thing that sent the chills down my spine was a green file at the bottom. It was a life insurance policy in my name, Arthur Pendleton, with a $5 million payout. Sole beneficiary, Sarah Ford. Date signed. Just a month ago. "They've got it all figured out," I whispered, feeling my chest tighten. "If I die tonight, it will be an accident. $60 million plus $5 million in insurance. This old man's life is clearly valued by them down to the last penny." I continued rummaging through my desk drawer. And then I found it, a crumpled email printout tucked deep in the corner. It was an exchange between an unknown email address and Sarah, pharmacist. This is colorless, odorless, and completely soluble in alcohol. It will cause symptoms identical to acute heart failure. It will not leave a trace without further testing. Sarah, good. Make sure it arrives by Friday. I slumped into my chair, the paper shaking in my hands. I wasn't just living with greedy children. I was living under the same roof as professional killers. And I knew they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. I had to act before they tried again. The next morning, I woke up feeling imprisoned in my own home. Sarah had begun her campaign to isolate me. "Dad, let me answer the phone," she said with false concern as she took the phone from me. "What if the reporters bother you about the sale of the company?" In essence, she was cutting me off from the outside world. But I wasn't a senile old man who could be manipulated. I had an old spare phone in my sock drawer. I waited until Sarah went to visit Greg in the hospital, then sneaked out the back door and took a cab to the south side. I met Miguel at Lou Mitchell's, a longtime Chicago diner where the smell of bacon and cheap coffee always hung in the air. It was a far cry from the faux glamour of l'orangerie, but here I found the truth. Miguel sat across from me, still looking a little worried. He recounted what he had seen in detail. "The husband didn't do it on his own, sir. I saw. Your daughter." She slipped the little bottle to him under the table. Then she signaled with her eyes when you stood up. His words were like knives stabbing into my heart. It was clear. Sarah wasn't just an accomplice. She was the mastermind. A stranger working as a waitress for minimum wage had saved my life, while my daughter, who I had sent to an Ivy League school, wanted to kill me. The irony was bitterer than any poison. I pulled out an envelope thick with cash, wanting to thank him, but Miguel pushed it back. "I didn't do it for the money, sir. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Just pay for my bus fare." I looked at him, a deep sense of gratitude rising in my heart. There were still good people in this world. They just didn't have my blood. Leaving the diner, I headed straight to a small private lab I had worked with years ago. I handed them the Ziploc bag containing Greg's silk handkerchief. "Check this for me. The sooner the better." 3 hours later, as I sat on a park bench, my spare phone rang. It was the head of the lab. "Mr. Arthur," he said gravely. "That stuff on the handkerchief, it's not a drug like you think. It's digoxin, a powerful heart drug derived from the digitalis plant. But at this high a dose, it will cause immediate cardiac arrest, much like a spontaneous stroke." I hung up, my knuckles turning white as I held the phone. Digoxin, a life-saving drug, now a murder weapon in my daughter's hands. A few days later, while I was sitting in the hospital waiting room, Sarah showed up with a thick file in her hands. She sat down next to me, her face showing extreme concern. "Dad," she began, her voice urgent, "Greg's bills are skyrocketing. His insurance doesn't cover this particular ICU. I need you to sign these papers so I can withdraw some money from your account. You know your account is temporarily locked because of that $60 million deal." A blatant lie. My account had never been locked. I took the file and pretended to squint. It wasn't a regular withdrawal form. It was a power of attorney. If I signed it, Sarah would have complete control of all my assets, even if I were still alive. Did she think I was getting old and confused? I've proofread merger contracts 1,000 times more complicated than this pile of paper when she was still learning to walk. "Okay, baby, if you want me to be a nerd, I'll show you." "Oh, my eyes are so bad," I lamented, my hand shaking as I held the pen she handed me. "The letters are so small I can barely see anything. And my hand, why is it shaking so much today?" I deliberately dropped the pen on the floor, then bent down to pick it up with difficulty. "Can you sign it tomorrow?" "I'm so tired today." Sarah gritted her teeth, but still managed to keep a crooked smile. "Okay, Dad, get some rest." As soon as she left, I immediately went to an old public phone booth in a hidden corner of the hospital. I didn't dare use my cell phone for fear it had installed listening software. I called Rosen, my old lawyer friend, and also a cunning fox in the Chicago legal world. We met secretly in Millennium Park, sitting on a bench overlooking Cloudgate. Rosen looked over the copy of the power of attorney I had secretly photographed. "Arthur," his voice was low and serious, "they don't just want $60 million. This power of attorney has a clause that allows it to put you in a nursing home if you become incapacitated. They want you to disappear legally, old man. I felt a chill run down my spine in the Chicago autumn air. So what are we going to do, Rosen? Rosen smiled, the smile of an old wolf about to hunt. We'll play tricks on you. You just keep pretending to be a fool. The weaker the better. Let them take it easy. And I'll prepare a legal trap they won't see coming. Before we parted, Rosen slipped a small object into my hand. It was a very ordinary-looking Mont Blanc ballpoint pen. From now on, write everything down, he whispered. This pen has a tiny recorder attached. Anything they say will be used as evidence to put them in jail. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it with you? And where are you listening? In the days that followed, I began to play the hardest role of my life, a confused old father. I deliberately called Sarah by the name of my late wife, Laura, whenever she approached. Laura, are you back? I asked. My eyes blurred from acting, my hand trembling as I reached out. Sarah paused for a moment, then quickly played the role of a dutiful daughter in front of the nurses. No, Dad, it's Sarah. Mom's dead. Have you forgotten? She stroked my hand, her voice sickeningly sweet. But as soon as she turned away to get some water, I saw the corner of her mouth curl up into a smirk. She was triumphant. She believed the shock from Greg's accident had pushed me into the abyss of old age. Every time I pretended to spill a glass of water or forget where I was, his eyes lit up. Not because he was worried, but because he was seeing the prospect of getting the $60 million coming closer. He was waiting for the day when I would be completely useless. One afternoon, while I was lying on the couch in Greg's hospital room pretending to sleep, Sarah walked into the bathroom right next door. He thought I was fast asleep. I secretly turned on the Mont Blanc voice recorder in my pocket and pressed my ear to the door. Hello? Yeah, it's me, he whispered, but his voice was cruel. The old man is about to collapse. He's so confused he called me Mom today. Yeah, if Greg wakes up and keeps his mouth shut, if this doesn't work, we'll try something else. Maybe a stair accident at home. Much easier to stage. I lay there, cold as a corpse. My daughter, the child I had cherished since she was a baby, was now plotting how to kill me a second time if the first failed. At that moment, a faint moan came from the hospital bed. Greg was awake. He opened his eyes, looked around groggily, and then his gaze stopped on me, the confused father-in-law sitting and staring at him. His pupils contracted. He began to struggle, the heart monitor beside him beeping loudly. He did not see a frail old man. He saw the man who had switched the wine glass, the man who had sent him to death and pulled him back. The utter panic was written all over his distorted face. Thanks to Rosen's clever arrangement, Sarah was called out by the doctor to sign some additional insurance papers. The door to the hospital room closed, leaving Greg and me alone in the antiseptic-smelling space. I walked over to the hospital bed where my precious son-in-law lay motionless, tethered to all sorts of wires. When he saw me, his eyes widened, his pupils shrunk in fear. He tried to reach for the nurse call button, but I was faster. I gently but firmly held his hand. Don't do that, Greg, I said, my voice low and strangely calm. No longer the old man. We need to talk like two men. Or at least, a man and a loser. Greg tried to struggle, but the sedatives and the after-effects of digoxin left him as weak as a mouse. I leaned close to his ear, whispering loud enough for only the two of us to hear. I know what was in that drink, Greg. Digoxin, right? And I know exactly who gave it to you. Your wife, my precious daughter. Greg's face drained of color. He stared at me, as if he'd just seen a ghost. You know, I continued, my voice cold, if I call the police right now, you'll go to jail for attempted murder. But if I don't, what do you think Sarah will do to you? A living witness who knows so many of her secrets. Will she let you live in peace, or will you have another accident with your own heart medication? My threat struck Greg's weakest point, cowardice. He feared prison, but he feared his cruel wife even more. I saw tears of fear begin to roll down his cheeks. Look at you, I said, my voice filled with contempt, lying here like a cripple. You're just his pawn, Greg. He used you to kill me, and now he'll use your death to wipe out his tracks if he needs to. Do you want to live, or do you want to die for a woman who doesn't love you? Greg was devastated. He sobbed weakly, trying to nod. Who supplied the drugs? I asked, pressing. Greg's lips moved, each word struggling to form, as if each word was a knife in his throat. Doctor. Varma, he supplied. That name. A new clue. A ray of light in this dark tunnel. I let go of his hand, stood up, adjusted my vest. Rest, son. And remember, your life is in my hands now. Greg's name, Dr. Varma, led Rosen's private investigator and me to a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of Cicero, where even the police hesitated to patrol at night. I'd imagined a corrupt doctor living in a luxury apartment selling illegal drugs, but the reality was much harsher. We found him in a 24-hour laundromat reeking of cheap bleach and the hum of old washing machines. The once prominent cardiologist was now mopping the floor, his eyes lifeless. As I approached, Varma looked up. Recognizing me, he immediately cowered defensively, his eyes flashing with anger and fear. Pendleton? He snarled, clutching the mop like a weapon. What are you doing here? Hasn't your daughter ruined me enough that you're here to laugh at me? I was stunned. Ruined you? I thought you were the one supplying the drugs? Varma laughed, a bitter, pained laugh. Supply? She stole them? 5 years ago, Sarah was my clinic manager. When I found out she was embezzling funds, she turned the tables. She accused me of sexual harassment, spread rumors everywhere. I lost my license, my wife divorced me. I lost everything. And before she disappeared from my life, she emptied my stash of drugs, including that damn digoxin. I sat down on the cracked plastic chair, feeling like a ton of rocks were pressing down on my chest. I thought it was just greedy for my $60 million. Turns out it was a real predator all along. It had been coldly destroying other people's lives without me, this blind father knowing. After calming down and realizing we had a common enemy, Varma dug into his tattered backpack and handed me a stack of yellowed papers. I still have these, he said, his voice shaking with anger. Her blackmail emails. They show how it works. She threatens to ruin the reputation of her victims if they don't comply. I clutched the evidence in my hand. I had a motive. I knew the means. And now I had the psychological profile of a career criminal. It was time to set the final trap to end this nightmare. After Greg was discharged from the hospital and sent home as a temporary invalid, I knew the time was ripe. I sat in the living room, where the gas fireplace was burning low, trying to look like a man completely beaten down by age and family tragedy. When Sarah walked in, I sighed, setting down my teacup with a deliberate shaking hand. Sarah, I said, my voice hoarse, not daring to look her in the eye. Greg's accident. It made me realize. Life is too short. I'm tired. I don't want to fight anymore. I want to go back to my old house in the suburbs, plant some vegetables, and live out the rest of my days in peace. I paused, letting her take in the words. All this property, the $60 million, you take care of it. I'll sign over the management to you. Tomorrow. Sarah froze for a moment. I could see the triumph flash in her eyes, though she tried to hide it by covering her mouth with her hand, feigning emotion. Crocodile tears began to fall. Oh, Dad, don't say that. We only want what's best for you. She hugged me. I could feel her heart beating fast with excitement. Eat it, girl. Swallow this bait. You think you've won, but you don't know that tomorrow's party isn't your coronation, it's your trial. As soon as she left the room to get the doctor to check on Greg, I turned on the wire. As expected, she called her lawyer. Get the papers ready, the old man's caught. Tomorrow. It's all mine. I hung up, then called Rosen. Get ready, old man. The fish is bitten. Tomorrow we'll finish this. That night, I sat looking at the old family photo taken on Sarah's 5th birthday. The innocent girl with the angelic smile was dead. The woman who lived in my house was now a monster with her face. I said goodbye to the girl in my memory, then wrote special invitations for the party tomorrow. The guests would include not only relatives, but also uninvited guests that Sarah never wanted to see again. My mansion was ablaze with lights that evening. Sarah had hired a top Chicago event planning company to prepare for this cozy family party. Chilled Dom Perignon champagne was passed around by white uniformed waiters. Silver platters of caviar and foie gras were beautifully arranged. Everything smelled of money, the smell Sarah craved most. She wore a bright red Valentino gown, pacing like a queen, receiving early congratulations from relatives on her imminent takeover. In one corner of the room, Greg sat huddled in a wheelchair. He looked like a ghost, his face pale, his eyes darting around in fear whenever he saw me looking his way. I saw Sarah bend down, pretending to adjust her husband's collar, but in reality she was whispering a threat. "Try to smile, you useless thing. Today is our day to win. Don't let the old man suspect anything, or you know the consequences." Her cruelty even towards her comrades made me shudder with disgust. I stood on the mezzanine looking down, feeling like a director watching the play before the opening. They raised their glasses, laughed, and toasted to each other about the money they were about to steal from me. They didn't know that the glass of wine I offered them today wasn't poisoned, but it would be much harder to swallow than digoxin. The clock struck 8 p.m. I signaled to Rosen, who was standing in the crowd. He nodded slightly, then retreated towards the door of the library, where the special guests were waiting. I took a deep breath, completely shaking off the role of a frail old father. I walked down the stairs, straight to the small podium set up in the middle of the living room. I took the microphone. The noise died down. Sarah looked at me with encouraging eyes, waiting for me to declare the power to her. "Thank you all for coming tonight." My voice rang out, no longer trembling. It was steely, calm, and authoritative, just like the way I used to run the shareholder meetings at Apex Biodine. Before I sign any papers, I want to tell you a little story. A story about a glass of wine. Sarah's smile froze. She sensed the change in my tone, but it was too late to stop. And the story begins in a five-star restaurant with a very filial son-in-law. Một người con rể rất hiếu thảo đã lén bỏ một loại bột màu trắng vào ly rượu vang của bố vợ mình khi ông ấy đi vắng. Tôi ngừng lại, quét mắt nhìn khắp căn phòng đang ai ảm phăng phắc. Nhưng cậu ta không biết rằng ly rượu đó đã bị đánh tráo và chính cậu ta đã uống cạn liều thuốc độc dành cho bố vợ mình. Một làn sóng xôn xao lan truyền khắp phòng tiệc. Mọi ánh mắt đổ dồn về phía Greg đang ngồi run rẩy trên xe lăn. Sarah bật dậy, chiếc ly trên tay nó rơi xuống sàn vỡ tan. Bố đang nói cái gì vậy? Nó hét lên, giọng lạc đi vì hoảng loạn pha lẫn giận dữ. Nó lao về phía tôi, cố gắng diễn vai người con lo lắng cho cha già bệnh tật. "Mọi người ơi, bố tôi, ông ấy bị lẫn rồi." Cú sốc từ tai nạn của Greg làm ông ấy hoang tưởng. "Bác sĩ đâu? Mau đưa bố tôi vào phòng nghỉ." Ngay lập tức, hai nhân viên bảo vệ lực lượng, những người mà Sarah đã thuê riêng cho bữa tiệc này, lập tức tiến về phía tôi. "Đấy, con gái," tôi thầm nghĩ, nhìn thẳng vào mắt nó. "Hãy cho mọi người thấy con người thật của con đi. Không còn những lời ngọt ngào giả tạo nữa, chỉ còn nanh vuốt sắc nhọn khi bị dồn vào chân tường." "Khoan đã." Một giọng nói đanh thép vang lên. Luật sư Rosen bước ra từ đám đông, giơ tay ngăn cản hai bảo vệ. Ông Arthur hoàn toàn tỉnh táo, và chúng tôi có bằng chứng để chứng minh những gì ông ấy nói là sự thật. Sarah trừng mắt nhìn Rosen. "Ông là ai? Ông dựa vào đâu mà nói vậy? Đây là chuyện gia đình tôi." "Đây không còn là chuyện gia đình nữa, cô Ford," tôi nói, giọng lạnh lùng. "Đây là hiện trường một vụ án." Tôi ra hiệu về phía cánh cửa thư viện. Cánh cửa gỗ sồi nặng nề từ từ mở ra. Hai người đàn ông bước vào. Người đầu tiên là Miguel, vẫn trong bộ đồng phục bồi bàn giản dị. Nhưng người thứ hai mới là cú sốc thực sự. Khi Sarah nhìn thấy người đàn ông trung niên với mái tóc hoa râm và đôi mắt đầy vẻ buộc tội bước vào, mặt nó cắt không còn giọt máu. Nó lùi lại, va vào bàn tiệc, làm đổ cả tháp ly sâm panh. Đó là Dr. Varma. Bóng ma từ quá khứ mà nó đinh ninh đã chôn vùi vĩnh viễn dưới lớp tro tàn của sự nghiệp bị hủy hoại. Con nghĩ con đã xóa sạch mọi dấu vết, phải không Sarah? Tôi bước xuống bục, tiến lại gần nó. Nhưng con quên mất một điều quan trọng. Những người con từng hãm hại, họ không bao giờ quên. Và hôm nay, họ đến để đòi lại công lý. Miguel took a step forward, his voice trembling but firm under the gazes of hundreds of Chicago's elite. He pointed a finger at the woman in the bright red Valentino dress. You gave that bottle to your husband under the table. I saw it all in the reflection in the glass." Sarah gasped, about to shout in protest when Attorney Rosen stepped forward. In his hand was not a toast, but a forensic file with a bright red seal. "And here are the test results from the toxicology lab. On the handkerchief Greg used to wipe his mouth when he collapsed, they found a lethal amount of digoxin, a heart medication, but at this dose, it's poison." The room gasped in horror. Guests began backing away from Sarah as if she were a germ, but I didn't stop there. I nodded to Rosen. He pulled out his familiar Mont Blanc pen from his breast pocket and connected it to the party's expensive surround sound system. A second later, Greg's weak, frightened voice rang out, each word clearly on the loudspeaker. "It's Sarah. It's her." She said you're old. Die to save space. She needs $60 million to pay off gambling debts and lost investments. I don't want to do it, but she forced me. Greg, still sitting in the wheelchair in the corner of the room, bowed his head, his hands covering his head, not daring to look into his wife's eyes that seemed to want to devour her. That confession was like the final hammer blow that shattered Sarah's perfect mask. She screamed wildly, no longer resembling a noble heiress. She rushed towards me, her elaborately manicured hands reaching out as if to scratch, trying to snatch the microphone. "Turn it off. Turn it off now. You bastard." But before it could touch me, two waiters standing nearby rushed over, restrained it, and twisted its arms behind its back. They pulled out their badges, not waiters, but undercover police. I stood there, watching the daughter I gave birth to, raised and loved with all my heart. Now she was struggling like a wounded animal, naked before the truth, with nothing but greed and cruelty. My fatherly heart was shattered into pieces, more painful than any poison, but my mind knew this was the right thing to do. At that moment, the sound of police sirens blared loudly outside the mansion gate, mixed with the sound of red and blue traffic lights shining through the windows. This party was truly over. The mansion's large doors swung open, letting in the chilly winds from Lake Michigan. A squad of uniformed police officers entered, led by a stern-looking detective. He marched straight up to Sarah and Greg, his voice monotonously reciting the cold pronouncements I never thought I would hear in my own home. "Sarah Ford, Greg Ford, you are under arrest for attempted first-degree murder. You have the right to remain silent." Greg, still in his wheelchair, began to cry bitterly like a child. He clasped his hands and bowed to me, tears and snot running down his face. "Dad, forgive me." "I didn't want to do it. It was all Sarah's fault. She forced me. Please tell them, Dad." I looked at him, my gaze not filled with pity, only contempt for a coward who refused to take responsibility until the last minute. I shook my head slowly, turning away. Unlike her husband, Sarah did not beg. When the cold handcuffs locked tightly on her wrists, she raised her head, her eyes blazing with hatred as she looked at me. Even as she was being escorted past me, she still tried to lean forward, spitting out her last poisonous words. "Do you think you won, old man? Look at yourself. You are old. You will die alone in this big cold house. No one will love you. Your money cannot buy love." Every word she said was like needles stabbing my already bleeding heart. She was right, I would be lonely. This house would be too big for an old man near death. But I would rather choose loneliness in the naked truth than warm myself with the deadly fire of lies. I did not lose my child today. I lost her a long time ago, from the day money swallowed her innocent soul. The guests left in stunned silence. No one dared to look me in the eye. They had come to celebrate a happy family, but instead witnessed a devastating tragedy. When the last policeman left, the room felt eerily empty. I was left standing in the ruins of a lavish party. Attorney Rosen stepped forward and placed a warm hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. "It's over, old man." His voice was low and sympathetic. "You're safe. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past, without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you? And where are you listening?" 6 months have passed since that fateful night. The large mansion in the Chicago suburbs has been sold, taking with it the painful memories I no longer want to keep. Now, I live in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, smaller, cozier, and most importantly, not as cold. I used some of the $60 million to establish the New Hope Foundation, which provides legal and financial support to elderly people who are abused or exploited by their children. Every day, reading the handwritten thank you letters from those the foundation has helped, I feel my heart warm. I realize that I am no longer a lonely victim. I have become a champion for those in the same situation. This afternoon, I have a date with Miguel. The brave waiter from back then is now a freshman at DePaul University, majoring in business administration, thanks to a full scholarship I sponsored. Looking at him excitedly talking about his future plans, about his dream of opening his own restaurant. I see an image of myself when I was young. Although we are not related by blood, I feel more attached to him than to my own blood relatives who betrayed me. The sunset falls, dyeing the surface of Lake Michigan red. I sit on the balcony. The cool autumn wind blows through. In my hand is not an expensive glass of wine, but a cup of warm chamomile tea. I used to think that $60 million was the greatest achievement of my life. I was wrong. My greatest achievement is that I dared to face the cruel truth that the people I love the most want to harm me, and was brave enough to cut out that tumor to save myself. I lost a fake family, but I found myself again, found the true value of life. And tonight, for the first time in many years, I know I will have a good sleep, a truly peaceful sleep. No more fear, no more doubt. Only the serenity of a person who has gone through a storm and found a peaceful harbor for his soul.